Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
So the next speaker, in some parts of Bulgaria, he's known as the IT guy, but only like 5 people are going to get that joke. It refers to the 2019 version of this conference, when we did a joint session. And yesterday when I had a masterclass, I got asked why we're not doing a joint session. And it's simple, the last one was so good. We never could top that, so we're never doing it again. Well, never say never. But this time, Mr. Ken Puls from Canada is going to talk about Power Query, obviously. And he's going to talk about the get data from folder, which if you've ever used, you know it's kind of takes time. Now he's going to tell you how to make it lightning fast. You ready?
Lightning fast.
Well, no pressure.
Yeah, because that won't happen. So yeah, of course I'm ready.
Yeah,
I was born ready. Absolutely.
There you go, the IT guy.
Thanks very much. I got to tell you, I am super happy to be back here. Sofia is one of my favorite places to come and visit and do a conference, and I was really crushed that I actually couldn't make it here for the last edition. This is awesome. I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional already, and you know that must be the jet lag. Anyhow, let's get started. How many of you use Power Query? How many of you have built a from folder solution? And keep your hands up for everybody, put your hand up. How many of you were satisfied with the performance of that solution when you tried to refresh your data? Wow, a lot of hands went down. Okay, so that's an interesting thing. So what we're going to talk about today is why is my from folder solution getting slower? What I've put together for you today is an incredibly technical presentation to get you started with your day. So I hope you had your coffee. All right. Are we still good? Okay, cool. Before we dive in, I want to talk just quickly about a little review of the ideal from folder setup. This is what I teach in my courses for how to actually build a solution to begin with, because I'm going to be making changes and leveraging this in order to make things a little bit faster. So, the recommended combined files setup works like this. We start with a folder of files, obviously. What we're going to do is we're going to use Power Query to go and get data from folder or from SharePoint folder. And we're going to make what I call a files list query. The point of the files list query is not to do any work except to go and figure out which files I want to combine. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to shortlist things down there to get to just the list of files I want. And at that point, we stop. We load it as connection only. We do not combine files in this query ever. What we do is we reference it, and we make a new combine query. And the first thing we do in that step is click the Combine Files button. Now, from here, it'll go out and do a little bit of magic. We'll talk about that in a second. And then I might reference this again and spin off other queries for dimensions or factors, building a model. And eventually, those are going to get loaded into the data model, or if I'm feeling weird, an Excel table. That doesn't happen often. I like the data model better. Power Pivot, you may know it as. But that's the general route that we go through. Now, the important part of this say is in that combine query thing, the first thing I do in that step is I click the Combine Files button, and at that point, some magic happens. Shortlist your files here, click the Combine Files in this one, and you get all of this. Essentially, what you end up having here is that this effectively means your combine query is reading the first file that you see in the output of the files list query. It then gives you the ability to go and transform your data in what's called the transform sample file. This is imperative that you do as many transforms in this stage as you possibly can. We follow Matthew Roche's maxim here of try and form or transform as close to the data source as possible, as far downstream as necessary. This is as close as you can get to the actual data source. That will then build this amazing function that gets leveraged throughout the rest of the system. And most of this stuff just does the work for you. You don't really have to think about it too hard. But this offers you a couple of really important benefits when you get into performance issues. And if I can throw me away on the screen again, thank you. I don't need to see me on the screen at all. My slides are loaded with stuff, guys. So you can just leave me. I'll dance up here for everybody. But so basically what this means is that if you want to change the file that you're using in your transform sample, it's as super easy as going back to the files list and just resorting it differently or filtering it differently temporarily. That'll bring the first file to the list. You've now got that to work with for your transform step. The other thing is, again, you want to do as much things as possible inside the transform sample, and you're going to see why that is in a second. So let me just do a quick little hop over to Excel here, and I'm going to show you the file that I'm working with in order to make all this stuff happen. So I have some data that's been loaded, and you can see over here I've got a list of queries. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hop into the files list query, and I'm just going to go through this quickly because I've only got 35 minutes or so. I am starting using a from folder solution, and I am working on my local computer because I don't have time to wait for the SharePoint refreshes in this session, okay? Anybody who's worked with a SharePoint folder knows how that works. The thing that I want you to understand about this is that I am replicating the way SharePoint works, though. In a local from folder solution on your local computer, you can drill directly down to the subfolder, but on SharePoint you can't. You have to start at the root. So what I've done is I've said, cool, let's go and start at my folder root, which is starting in my C drive here, and it's going to a specific folder on my computer, which is this one right here under my SharePoint syncing folder. This is the root of the site. If I were to look at it in SharePoint, it would look like that, okay, the root of the SharePoint site. So we're starting right at the very top, and then what I'm doing is I'm also then filtering down into a subfolder of files, which is under here. So what you can see is that I am starting, let me just get out of the zoom mode, that's going to be crazy. So I'm starting at the folder root, removing other columns to get down to a little bit more manageable list, replacing some values, filtering some rows and stuff like that, and filtering down to get to my eventual list of files that I want to combine. The only trick in here is there's one file that I've removed. And I believe that you can see it right here. It's called historicalsnapshot.csv. I don't want that one, so I've filtered it out. But basically, we're getting down to a nice list of files. This query got loaded as connection only. I referenced it in staging sales. The first thing that I did was combine files. So if I go back here, you can see from here, I did the combined files on the content. I got a nice little transform, and let me show you how incredibly complicated this transform is. We had a source, we removed some headers, we promoted a header, changed type, that's automatic, unpivoted some columns and renamed them and rounded off the numbers, okay? It's not complicated, but I want you to know that there's something going on inside this, and I very specifically did this in the transform sample, not in the combiner query. Okay, there's a reason for that. This function got leveraged inside my combining query. It has added a bunch of steps to it, which basically invokes this, stacks them all together, and that got loaded into the sales table, which goes to the worksheet. Okay, so that's the basic setup that we're working with. Now, let's go talk about why is this so slow. This one's not. You're going to see that in a little bit here. So the default combine files time equation that we run into when we're working with Power Query looks like this. We start when you, so how many of you have noticed when you do a refresh in Power Query, it takes a little bit of time before something actually happens? You guys have all seen this, right? So what's actually happening is that the Power Query engine goes back, the lazy evaluation engine goes back, and it tries to work out what your query should actually look like. It might throw some steps away, it might reorder some things, which can be a little frustrating on occasion. But this takes, let's call it K seconds of overhead that the Power Query engine is doing to generate a plan before it actually starts refreshing any data. The next thing that we have to look at is how many seconds does it take to create your filtering query? And I call this F seconds for filter. It's the filtering and pre-combining steps that we're working with. You then have the steps inside your transform sample. What does it take to do one file times how many files are there? Okay, so that's your T for one file transforms times N files. Once those all get done, then we have A seconds to append them all together and any other post-processing steps that you have. Once we've got through that stage where everything's put together, the next thing that happens is it takes W seconds to write it to your data source. Interestingly enough, the load destination that you choose has an impact on how long that takes. It takes longer to write to the data model than it does to an Excel worksheet. And it takes much longer to write to both. Okay? So the big question in here is, what can you do to speed this up? So there's a couple of different pieces here. Number one, you can control the method you use to collect the files you want to combine. Okay, so that's the first one, and we're going to look at how that works. We can control the number of files that we want to combine as well. And this is actually a real secret to getting some, not lightning fast, but some better performance gains out of this. You might be able to control the complexity of your transformations, maybe. This depends a lot on the complexity of your data source. So the trick on this whole thing here is to try and figure out, well, can I write things better? Okay, maybe you can, or is there just an easier way to deal with some different things? So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm actually just going to go in and run a real quick demo on, actually, no, let me go and continue one more slide here for a second. So the first thing I want to talk about is choosing the correct F, or the correct list to get that you want to get to. How do we get there efficiently? So the reason why Power Query's defaults can be slow, let's take a look at this folder hierarchy right here. Let's say that I want to get to the 2023 receipts folder that has 500 items in it. There are 33,594 items in this folder, however. Okay, so what do? We connect to folder.files. One of the really cool things about Power Query is it enumerates every file in every folder and every subfolder, uses a process of recursion that brings back that entire list. Recursion is really hard to write as a programmer. Well, it's not really hard, but it's definitely a challenge for somebody who isn't good at it. So this is a really nice feature until it's not. Okay? The default from folder connector uses this folder.files M code in order to connect to its folder root. If you're working with SharePoint, the only difference is instead of folder.files, you have SharePoint.files. That's really the main difference. There is an API tag that goes into this as well, but they basically work in the same manner. The problem is that on SharePoint, you must connect to the root of the folder. How many of you run personal SharePoint sites that don't have the entire organization in them? Yeah, no, exactly, right? The entire organization lives in there, all billions of files that have been created in your organization, and you have to correct to the root. You guys see where this might be a problem? And there might be a lot of files in there. The challenge that you have is that you've now got to go through every single file in every single subfolder and every single subfolder and every single subfolder to get to the entire list. The implications, no matter how you apply a filter to get down to just the files you want, every single file has to be checked. When you're working in a corporate world where you're stuffing the entire organization into the root of a SharePoint site, that's a lot of files that it has to loop through to get down to what you want. Once you get to the matching list of what you want, those are the end files that we actually combine. But there's a lot of filtering and removing things there that are kind of a bit of a problematic scenario. Now, let's go hop over to Excel for a second. How many of you were here last time I was here, about 4.5 years ago in 2019? Okay, not too many of you, all right. So I did a couple of cool things in the intermediate period that I wasn't around. Number one, I wrote a new book, okay? So that's one of the things I did. Thank you. The other thing I did is 6 months after I got home, I released a program software called Monkey Tools. How many of you have heard of Monkey Tools? Oh, cool. That's awesome. I'm hoping that, well, now all of you will have. So Monkey Tools is a nice little ribbon tab that we have up the top here. It's got lots of features. I'm going to demo one for you right now. It's called Time Sleuth. And what Time Sleuth is all about is about timing the performance of queries. So I'm just going to go and click this chart variation and run a detailed refresh on this right now. And what it's going to do is it's going to go through and it's going to time the setup that we actually have for this. So it's going to basically run some refreshes on this to see how it works. And we're going to do 5 of them. That's enough for the example here. And it creates one of my favorite visuals, which is called a box and whisker plot. Not often seen in finance, but when you're doing performance testing, this can be really useful. How many of you who have no idea how to read one of these? Yeah? Okay, cool. So basically, here's the deal. This is a statistical plot. The X in the middle is your mean average, okay? Count of items divided by, or sorry, sum of items divided by count of items. The blue line in the middle here is your median, okay? So that's just a different average. The top of this bar is your 75th quartile, so 25% of the values will come above it, 25% of the values will come below this one here, and this box basically says 50% of the refresh times that I had will fall into this area. The taller the box is, the more variation. The narrower it is, the less, okay? What we can see here is the average is about 2-something seconds. That's not bad. I can work with something like that. How many of you got a 2-second refresh on SharePoint? Sorry, I don't even need to look, right? Because that never happens. All right, let me rename this as folder.files. Let me just call this perf compare. So this is our benchmark that we're going to look at to see, can we do better? that make sense so far? Thank you. Awesome. I'm glad you're all awake as I am. All right. So here's the deal. The thing to remember about this, the more files you add to your solution, the slower things are going to go. It only makes sense, right? More things you got to filter through, even if you don't need to use them. So there is, however, another connector that is available, which is called folder.contents. What's frustrating about this one is that it is not available through the user interface. You have to do a little bit of work. You got to type some M code. Now, it's not a huge amount of M code. Basically, what you got to do is replace .files with .contents with a capital C and an S at the end. And if you get that wrong, it just says nasty things to you. This also works the same on local as it does on SharePoint, but again, remember, with SharePoint, you must connect to the root of the site, where locally you can connect to a subfolder. If you make this modification, what happens is you now get the files and folders in the current folder only. Okay, this makes a big difference because you don't have to recursively look through everything below that. The implications is that no matter how you filter, only the targeted folder's contents are checked against your master list. And that's going to make things a lot faster. Okay, it only checks a specific folder. So your matching files, of course, are kept for your list of end files. So let's go and hop over to our scenario here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rebuild this solution using our folder.contents method. So just for fun, and I recommend if you're going to retrofit something, you do this. We're going to right-click and duplicate my files list query. And I'm just going to give this one a name here. I'm going to call this one fileslist-files because that's the original connector that I was using. And I'm now going to go over to our original files list query. I want everything else to stay the same. I just want to change the way this one works. So I'm going to go back to the source step. I'm going to go to folder.files for my root folder here, and I'm going to change this to folder.contents. Okay? That's it. Very simple change. Enter. Now, you can see the list changed in a big way. What I'm now looking at is a listing of the folders and individual files that are in my root folder. Okay? So it's dropped it down quite a bit. Now I've got to find my data. My data is under this one here, Keynotes. There's a table, so I'm going to drill into that. And what I want you to watch is what happens on the right-hand side here. You'll see all those steps where I did all the preparation to get down to just a list of files that I want. This thing's now giving me a nice big warning to say, I'm going to throw all of that away on you, and you got to start all over. Boom, we got a huge list of files. This is one of the reasons why I suggest you duplicate this and keep it around so you know what you need to get back to, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and find the list that I need to get to. So we're going to go into Y from folder is slow. We're going to go to data. At this point in time, what I am going to do is I'm going to expand my content here. And the only thing that I care about, actually, hang on a second. Let me make sure that I do this exactly right. Yeah, let's go right-click, remove other columns. We will expand this now. The only things I'm going to take, the content and the name. This will bring me over this. Here's my historical snapshot that I want to get rid of. So we are going to, hold on a second. Let me just make sure that I didn't just mess myself up for future. Yeah, I totally messed myself. No, I didn't. All right, I'm good. Woo. It's still early for me. All right, we're going to say does not equal historical snapshot. We'll get rid of that. I can now remove the other columns and drill into the content, the name, and the folder path. This gets me down to a similar place where I was before. I do want to get rid of this leading folder path. This drives me crazy. Like, I just want to see the root here. So I'm going to come over to folder path. We're going to say replace values. And I have a variable called folder root that I want to get rid of. We're just going to change this to parameter, rather. So change that to parameter for folder root. That'll strip that off the beginning. But I also want to get rid of and the folder data variable as well. I'm now down to the same folder that I had. Okay. I now need one more column. So I'm going to grab this one. We'll say add column, extract, text before delimiter. I so wish this existed when I wrote my first book, but it didn't. And I can't remember if I put it in the second book or not. We'll rename this one to date, Control A, detect our data types. Actually, let me do that on these guys here. Detect data types, there we go. So now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to check, Does this look the same? I never brought my extension over. I should probably grab that too, just to make sure that everything is the same. So let me go back to my removed other columns. That is not the right one. Let me go to my expand contents and the extension. All right. I'm glad I made my copy so I can check. So these two things now look exactly the same. So if I'm making changes live to my model, this is a good, healthy practice to be in. Because files list was a connection-only query, now when I go and say close and load, and I duplicate it, it's going to use the same behavior, so that's not going to change anything. And now what I want to do is I just want to make sure that my sales query refreshes, and it does. So now we'll go back to Monkey Tools and we'll test the time on this one with a new connector. Okay. So let's see if this one runs any faster. Kind of hoping that it should. Boom. All right. So if you are timing queries in Power Query, there's a lot of technical reasoning behind all this stuff, but I actually recommend that you time it about 10 times. The first query usually takes longer than the rest of them when we're going through this process. But let me go and just draw you a quick comparison of what we have here. So this is folder.contents. Can't spell when I'm standing up. There we go. We're going to copy that. Paste it over there. And tell me, do you think, is that any better? Yeah, it does. It looks better. I mean, so again, I mean, the box is shifted down. That's your big clue on it. I'm not a big fan of how tall that variation is. And if I ran 10, what you'd see is that the outlier would start to actually decrease this a little bit. We've got one there that's sort of, polluting the results and whatnot a little bit. But at the end of the day, if we take a look at that, we can see that just by changing from folder.files to folder.contents, on a local hard drive that runs really fast, we've actually cut the time down. Now, to be honest, do we care about 2 seconds to 1 second? Probably not, okay? But as I think I mentioned before, trying to get a 2-second refresh out of SharePoint, good luck with that, right? So there's our first piece. So, all right. Now, the next part that I want to go through and take a look at here is your theory of comparison. Why is this different, right? Well, the way that this works is that when we take a look at, if we're drilling down to a specific folder, the first thing that has to happen is if you connect to the root using folder.files, we have to enumerate through 33,594 files. If you connect to the folder.contents at finance, there are only 2 things in here, 2003 and 2002. So it's only got to look at 2 things to decide where you're going to go from here. You now drill down into only 2023. We've still got 20,000 files. We've got 3 folders, invoices, receipts, and statements. You go and you drill down to just receipts. We're now 500 files in both cases. Now, truth be told, Power Query is actually only going to scan those 33,500 files once. It's not like it goes through and does each of these steps individually. It just feels that way, okay? Because, of course, the slower things get, the worse they hurt. But at the end of the day, this is the big piece. There's a huge change in the way that this thing approaches here and a huge change in performance in most cases. If it feels like your folder.file solution is slowing down, that's because it is. You add more files in there, every new quarter you're adding more files in there, it's going to slow down. Okay? Does that make sense so far? Cool, all right. So what else can we do? Can we make this any more efficient? So this is where I want to show you what happens if we start trying to minimize the next step of this equation, the t times n. And the big question that I would have to ask you is, if you start building solutions that are combining files on a historical basis, and this is what I find a lot of finance people are doing. I'm combining the last 10 years, the last 12 years, and I'm just throwing new stuff in there, and it's getting longer and longer. Or maybe it's every day throughout a year, and it's getting slower and slower through the entire year. How often is the data historically actually changing? And it probably isn't, right? It's just that this is the method we set up to combine these things. So can we do something to change that ability so that we're actually only doing the transforms on stuff that's new, right? It's kind of like incremental refresh, kind of. So here's the overall strategy of what we're looking for here is if we've got the data and it's already being transformed, can we export that to a CSV file? And then import and transform only new data since that point. We then import and we append the snapshot data to the transform data, and we should be back at the same place. Why would you do this? Well, number one, CSV is by far the most efficient type of data to import into Power Query. Okay? Power Query is really good at importing CSV files because there's no extra metadata that confuses it. It's just data, nicely structured, ready to go. The historical transformations are already done. Why waste the time transforming them? And if you don't have that extra overhead that goes into there, it's obviously going to speed things up. The other thing is that reading alone is always faster than reading and transforming. Absolutely always faster. Okay? So this is the big reason why this stuff actually works. Now, the question comes down to, though, how do you set up your system to actually make this go? So here's our original setup. I did have to move one of these things over to make an L shape on this, but folder files to files list are combined, other queries, and data model. So what I'm going to do is when I get to the last stage is I'm going to load, in step one, my data out into an Excel table and then save that as a specific CSV file. Okay? Once I've got my snapshot done, basically what I'm going to do in step two is say either repoint the files list or, more likely, just drag the files that I've snapshotted out of that folder and put them in the historical folder so that they're not there anymore. At that point, step three is we import the raw data snapshot and we append it to the combined query. Okay, that's basically it. Steps 1 and 2 only need to be done periodically. Step 3 will never need to be done again. So it's a one-time setup that we're actually looking at. So here we go. Let's go and take a look and see what happens if we can actually put this in place. So we already have our sales data here. Now, because of the way I've got my files structured, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop into my files list query here for a second, and I'm just going to make a quick change to my navigation step. I am actually going to add a filter here to say text filters equals historical. So this is going to be a temporary step that I'm putting in place to remove all my current files. Okay, so we're going to play the game as if I've already moved some of these things away or snapshotted beforehand. I'm going to go to close and load, and I'm going to reload my sales query. So we're going to say refresh. It should drop from 5,476 rows to 5,114. So there we go. So that's my snapshot, 5,114. Here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to go save as. I'm going to choose to save this as a CSV file. I am absolutely not going to save it on SharePoint. Do I have a Windows V? Do I have an old path on this one? Yeah, that would be nice. Where are you? Cool. So we're going there and historical, and I'll save it over top of my historical snapshot that I already have. We're going to say save. Historical snapshot already exists. Yes, got that. Yes, you can't have multiple sheets. That's fine. It's now saved it with the beautiful worksheet name of historical snapshot. That's awesome. Now that I've saved my snapshot, of course, I need to resave it back in Excel format. So we'll go File, Save As. We no longer want a CSV. We want an XLSX file. And I'm going to go back and save this in the root folder here, which is going to be in Ketchup01. Will work. There we are. We'll say Save. And I think I'm just going to rename that worksheet there too because it just drives me crazy when I've got things like that in there. So Control-S. Okay. So we've saved that. Now let's go flip this to the current files. So we'll go back to Files List, Edit. We're going to go back to my navigation step. And right here where we said filter to only keep historical files, we'll just change that and say, no, thanks for historical. We're going to change that out to just our current files this time around. And just to prove that that worked, let me refresh that. We now have 362 rows. Okay, so we're now down to a much shorter data set. Now, of course, I still need all the other stuff, though, right? So here's what we'll do is I'll jump into any query. Files list will work. And I'm going to go with a right-click, new query, from file, from text or CSV. I'm going to drill down and find my historical snapshot. There it is. And say import. And OK. Love this dialog, just there to slow me down. There we go. We can use the first row as headers. Wow, that's done. That's why I love CSV, right? It's all pre-prep. There's nothing else to do here except this. Let me go to the sales table, source, append queries. I'll insert a new step before the change type, just because that's the best thing to do. And we're going to import our historical snapshot here, append that into the table. So now, when we say close and load, and we refresh our data and it reloads, we've now got our 5,476 rows back. Are you with me so far? All right, cool. So the question now is, yeah, but is it any faster? And this is going to be disappointing. Oh. Why is it going to be disappointing? Well, I'll talk about that in a second too, but here we go. Oh, wow, no, hey, look at that. It's going to play nice today. I did not expect that at all. All right, cool. I'm very excited. So here we go. We're going to go and we're going to call this one Snapshot. I love when I actually know that it's not going to work and then it works. Like, that just is awesome, isn't it? So here we go. Boom. What, that's it? Yeah. I should say, that's pretty cool. Like, honestly, look at that. We've taken, I mean, it was fast before, 2 seconds. Am I going to go through this much work to try and get this down so that it's like, less than half a second? Well, I'm me, so probably. But, are you? Probably not. However, remember, this is still a very simple set of data, right? There's not a lot of transforms that are going on inside of this thing at all. It's only 5,400 rows. But the important thing to recognize here is we've now just offloaded the historical transforms. So instead of doing all of that work of let's transform each data times multiple files, now we just say, go get me the pre-transformed data, bring that in. I'm only going to transform the 6 files that are new. And every year, I'll just go and export a new snapshot, drag those files into the history folder, start again. It's all good, right? Just continues on. Now, oops, that's not where I want to go. Here we go. So a couple of things that I want to just bring out and make sure that you're aware of. I actually ran into a scenario where I really messed myself up the other day. I went to run through my presentation. I got to time this down to 30 minutes. 2 days later, I finished. And I went, okay, that's not going to fit in the time slot. What's going on? Because I made a big mistake on something. And the big mistake was I took my folder.contents, converted it to SharePoint.contents, and said run. And at that point in time, it became horrendously slow. I said, what is going on? Now, if you do a connection where you go from SharePoint folder and you drop in your root, when you take a look at the M code that is generated, it will have the root path, and then it will say, comma, API version 15. You need to have API version 15 on there. If you do not have this there at all, it defaults back to version 14. This is weird. I have never met a Microsoft software that will default to an older version by default. That's strange, especially when the performance is abysmal, and it is. Okay? So this is something to remember on this, is make sure that tag exists, make sure it's 15, unless you have no other option. Okay? If it doesn't work, then you go to version 14. The version 14 connector also has a couple of nuanced differences. It doesn't see a shared documents folder, it sees a documents folder. If you've actually coded a path to shared documents, it will blow up. And if you then code it to documents and switch to 15, it's going to blow up and you have to go back and fix some things. Okay? So just be something to be aware of here. This probably won't hit anybody, but I can't, in all good conscience, not let you know about this if you're going to start messing around with this area. The reason why this is important, in my experience, SharePoint.files refreshes 50% faster on version 15, and SharePoint.contents on version 14 actually refreshes slower than .files. It's like, that was what messed me up. I'm like, how is the performance getting worse? Like, what is going on? So the overall impact of this, just for reference, I rebuilt this exact same scenario using the SharePoint connectors, and I timed it. And the comparison of results, I want you to remember a couple things in here. Number one, the demo data sets were very small. The transformations were minimal. Okay, so there wasn't a lot going on here. In a real-world solution, these things are much, much bigger. And this is the performance result differencing. Okay, so 2.3 seconds for files, 0.6 for contents, 0.4 for snapshot when I was running this at home in my test. So some marginal improvement. SharePoint API 15, 41 seconds to refresh this exact data from my SharePoint site at home. 25 seconds when I just switched it to .contents and didn't do anything with snapshotting, down to 8 seconds when I went and said, hey, I want to offload the historical piece as well. This is how you get performance out. But when you forget to have that API tag on there, I ran 10 refreshes on each of these. Now, guess why I wasn't trying to do SharePoint Live in a demo here, right? I don't have enough time to finish it in the entire session. So these make some massive differences, and I had to test this multiple times to make sure. That's why it ate up 2 days of my time. But the key thing that I want you to remember here is look at that SharePoint improvement. That is a drastic improvement there. And now you got to ask yourself the question, why is that not available through the user interface? And I don't know, I just work here, okay? But the stars or the asterisks on these two things are your user entry points that you get to. They are on the left side, the .files connector. Making that switch to .contents will actually lead you into a lot better place. Some of the key takeaways here, as I say, the asterisks show user interface points. .contents is usually faster than .files. If you find that it is horrendously slow and seems worse, check if you've forgotten that API key on the end of it. Make sure that API 15 is being used. Transforms are expensive. They cost a lot of compute resources. When they're coming from SharePoint, they have to be streamed down to you with the data as well. There's latency and network connections. You want to try and avoid those as much as you can to really get the best performance out of the system. Now, I'm just about done, but I got a couple of things that I wanted to throw out here, just a couple of resources as well. I don't know how many, for those of you who've never seen Monkey Tools before, the feature that you just saw is what we call our time sleuth. It is intended in Excel to time the refresh of queries that load to either the data model or worksheet or a combination of both. We can't do connection-only queries for reasons that it just doesn't work. So if you are interested in playing around with this is one feature of Monkey Tools. I believe Monkey Tools may also make an appearance in the next session, I think. I've got a nod from Alan on that. If you like what you see and you'd like to get your own monkey, you can do that. You can visit monkeytools.ca. Now, we do have a free, and we have a trial, and we have a pro plan as well. But one thing that's, and if you come and take one of my courses, I even give you a pro license for part of the cost of the course. But one thing that I don't usually do is this. So because you guys came to a conference in person, and I want to express to you how much I appreciate the support that you guys do for paying to help us come to share this kind of stuff with you. I'd like to give you an offer here that if you're interested in doing a Monkey Tools Pro trial for 90 days, you can use this code here, or the monkeytools.ca try90 code. That will get you a 90-day demo of the Pro features. My normal Pro license is a 14-day trial, so this is a pretty big difference here. The other thing that... Cool. In all seriousness, there's some amazing stuff in here that's going to change your life. Like the table dialogue is just so much better. But at any rate, so here's the cool thing there is like I say, I'd love to see everybody try it. It should work on a Bulgarian version of Excel, and if it doesn't, there is a log a bug thing in the top. Send it to me and let me fix it. The other thing that I wanted to throw out there as well is that somebody in this room is going to get a copy of this book. We'll autograph it as well. And I already see somebody digging under their chair looking for a coupon code or something. If you reach under your chair, there's a piece of paper under some lucky person's chair. If you find it, you can bring that to me and redeem it for a book here at the end of it. And on that note, I'm going to end on this slide here. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and found it interesting and useful.
Okay. Thanks, Ken.